Yet another video in our guide to virtual practicals for academic purposes. Here we'll think about the intricacies of developing questions and the materials for an online practical tool. In this video, we mainly look at how we can make sure to create the right questions for students in an online quiz format. How do we make sure that they learn from it and not just button smash until they have the right answer? Also, integrated feedback for their responses and new knowledge that students can use to successfully finish a tool like what we made here during the RALDE project.
I think it's linked to how you would demonstrate it in the lab. So if it's something that in a real life situation, you would also show the students, you would really want them to have that visual aspect, then you also decide to go for a picture. While if it's more like a fact, for instance, like what is the percentage of ethanol that you need to use to clean surfaces and so forth, yeah, that's something you don't really need to show. That's more knowledge. So that's a bit also how we went, like how would we show it in the lab in a real life situation.
Yeah, in my case, I totally agree. Is if you need a visual support, you take the picture. If it's a knowledge question, you make a multiple choice quiz, for example. So that is the key point. And also an important point, sometimes when you use images, and perhaps an advice for somebody that is going to do it for the first time, is that we normally try to put the picture that is correct. But sometimes when you are asking the question, you need also the incorrect scenario, the false scenario. And sometimes you just don't have the picture and you have to go back to the lab to put something that is wrong or something that is not needed. But we didn't think about that at the beginning. So we had like the whole story, the whole correct story, following the workflow for the dissection. But in fact, you also need the incorrect scenarios in order to confuse the students or to ask them to select the true story. Mm-hmm. So, and if you are going to use the images, you really have to think in advance. In our case, we failed in that and we have a second round, just going back to the lab and putting things that are incorrect or that are not needed. That's the key point. We would have saved time if we have thought about that before. So in our case, it depends, because you can think that one answer is the correct one, or it was the correct years ago. I mean, so you can add it as a confusing factor. For example, how to do the euthanasia of rodents, for example. There are several ways that are accepted, but there are ways that were accepted in the past and that are not anymore legally accepted. So you can just put one of these methods to pick up if they know the current legislation, or they assume some ways of sacrificing the animals. You think that they're like using the decapitation. It's something that it's available and it's possible and it's legal and you can do it ethically. But sometimes students think that it's not possible or it's not allowed because it looks like a not ethical way of sacrificing the animals. So you can play with that. What do you expect somebody that doesn't know anything about this technique will choose or will never choose? And indeed, it's the correct answer. So you can play with assumptions you think your students have.
I agree with that. It's always hard to get into the mind of a student, of course, but indeed, from teaching experience, you know which kind of questions usually pop up and where the confusions usually were. An extra aspect from my side was, of course, that me being in Maastricht and Amaya being at the University of Navarra, we sometimes had different ways of teaching something. And then it's also good to think about, okay, yeah, but why is it that we do it like that? And are both correct? Or is one of us more accepted these days? And actually, we have, I think, one or two questions in the quiz platform where actually both of us seem to be correct. And then we actually say so in the feedback. And then I think even one question, both answers are considered correctly. But then in the feedback, we say, okay, usually it's like this, but this is also an option to do it. So we try to indeed not only think about mistakes that students usually make, but also about different scenarios. For instance, culturing cells in suspension, you can use these fancy Erlenmeyer flasks that you can specifically buy for that. But a lot of labs also just use normal cell culture flasks for attaching cells and just put them upside down. So we try to think also in alternative ways of how to approach it, and also include that in the questions and the feedback that people get on their answers. Yeah, we saw other tools. So for instance, LabBuddy is one of the commercial tools, and there I had already worked with building in feedback into questions. So I think it's because of that experience, and I also started using it here. And you actually have to think about every answer. So if it's a multiple choice, you have to think about, do I need to give different feedback depending on what answer they select? Or also if it's like a pick and drop exercise, you might want to give feedback in different combinations. So let's say they put something in a certain order, you might think, okay, why would they do that? And that might change your feedback. I'm trying to think about a specific example, but it escapes me now. But yeah, for instance, the difference in thawing or after thawing cells that grow in suspension compared to cells that grow attached, there's some difference in how you can start a cell culture. For instance, some labs just bring them immediately in the medium, others spin first. Also, the culturing is different. And then you can think, what if the student thinks that the way we culture attaching cells, this is the right way? And then you're also going to include that when you prepare the answers for the cells in suspension. And yeah, try to mix and match the wrong answers in there. And also the feedback that you say, okay, this is how it's done for attaching cells, but watch out for cells in suspension. This is slightly different, so that you point them to this. And I mean, to know that we didn't forget anything, we also, of course, asked feedback from our technicians. So once we had prepared like a draft, we worked with PowerPoint, but it doesn't matter really. But every slide, we prepared a question in PowerPoint with the feedbacks and everything. And then we send it to the technicians, like one in Navarra, one here, to really get feedback. Like, do you think this makes sense? Or do you think there's something else we should mention or include? So we already got feedback from others at that point before we actually started designing the questions.
Yeah, in our case, the feedback was always after each question. I mean, and when you have multiple choices, I think it's very important to explain the students why this answer is correct and why it's not. Because there are many things in the lab the students already know, because in our case, they're last year students, and they do it just because they've been taught to, and we just repeat things in the labs just because somebody told us that it should be done this way. But sometimes they don't know why. So it's very important to explain why the correct answer is correct, even if it's a really straightforward answer, and why the bad answer is not correct, in order to be sure that they're just not doing things just because somebody told them to do it. I mean, this is a key point. And the second one, especially when you are doing a dissection, the order in which you carry out the dissection is very important, because otherwise you are going to lose some organs. For example, the pancreas, you are going to lose it if there is a lot of blood around, and it's almost like fat. So it's difficult to pick this organ if you don't do it in the moment you are expected to collect it. So asking questions on how the order in which they're going to perform the dissection before we show them the organs was also a key point. And then explain why, because if they tell you the correct order without explaining why, they're not going to memorize it. I mean, and the reasons, once you know, you don't forget them. So I think that is a key point of the feedback in practical training. In our case, the practical, it's within a course where they already receive some information, background information, especially because they're learning how to do a dissection, but within in vivo toxicity study. So they know the experimental design and so on. So this is one thing. And the other thing, within the online practical, you can also use links to other. We found amazing books or amazing chapters of books that are explaining step by step all the dissection of a rodent. So I think that we just put the link to it so the students can use it and read it. And then, of course, as they have this tool available to do it whenever they want, they can go back to this information, because sometimes when you are doing some practicals, you need the information beforehand to start. But once you're doing, there are new questions that are popping up. And sometimes you need the material. And sometimes they just need to know that they have the material to go there to answer this new question that they have. So I think that it's like a circular system. I mean, they once they know something, they can go back and restart.
Yeah. No, we did similar things. So per module, since we split it up in per module, like the first things we give them is indeed either an instructional film that we actually found also online. I think there's one from Thermo Fisher, if I remember correctly. And we also just embedded it and acknowledged them for it. And then there's indeed some online information sheets on, for instance, contamination and how to prevent contamination. That, I mean, we always say you don't need to invent the wheel twice. So we indeed provided them with these kind of tools per module specifically, that they can read that first before then going into these interactive questions and interactive environments. And for instance, one link we provide is to the ATTC website that they have to read about HepG2 cells. And then when there were specific questions on that, we can also say, not always, but sometimes in the feedback when an answer is wrong, you can say, yeah, go back to this, because you should check the information again, because then you know the student didn't read it properly. Otherwise, they would have known that that was not a correct answer. So yeah, we do also, like you say, refer them back sometimes to this information to double check before continuing. Yeah, as long as, for instance, like I say, the film we embedded, first of all, it was freely available online, but also they have put their logo in the film. So we didn't cut it out or anything. We just keep it as it is. So you can see, okay, it is from Thermo Fisher and they designed it. And since it's freely online, you can reuse it. I think all of the things we used were freely available. I don't think we used textbooks, but I mean, I did it in another practical. Then you, of course, acknowledge the source. So you say, we got it from this textbook, this was the editor, and so forth. So it is important indeed to always acknowledge where you get the information from, and check the comments, as some depending on how it's published, they allow you to reuse it or not. So it's always good to check these comments per source.
Yeah. In our case, we had a parallel Erasmus Plus project that they were doing things that were complementary to ours, because they were dealing also with the steps of rodent dissection, but just explained in text, not with images, or with very few images. So of course, it was freely available, and we just put the link and citing that it was from another Erasmus Plus, so that it was not a problem because it's free. And it's true that we found a very good book chapter that is not freely available. And of course, I was able to access it because of my university has some access to some journals and books. So what we did there is, okay, we have this Erasmus Plus that is very interesting. It's freely available. And then we have a second source, like a book chapter, and we just cited it. We gave the complete citation of this book. So we know that in our case, from our university, as our university is paying for this book, our students can access that through our university. But if somebody else from outside another university that is not paying for that access, they won't be able to access with the link. They will have to buy the book or the chapter, but we didn't download the chapter and use it. We just cited it, completely cited. So whoever can access it can use it.